What if I told you that the most powerful fallen angel in existence, the very embodiment of rebellion and chaos, once found himself completely helpless against a prison made not of iron or stone, but of divine law itself? What if the Prince of Darkness, who commands legions of demons and has waged war against heaven for millennia, was utterly powerless to break free from chains forged by angelic hands? Welcome to Blood and Scripture, where ancient legends, forgotten horrors, and supernatural wars come to life. If you love exploring the untold side of mythology, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell below so you never miss another legendary story. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and terrifying questions in all of supernatural lore. Why couldn't the devil, with all his cunning and malevolent power, shatter the bonds of angelic imprisonment? The answer isn't what you think, and it reveals a cosmic truth about the very nature of divine justice that will change how you understand the eternal struggle between good and evil. But before we unravel this mystery, let me tell you why this matters. This isn't just some abstract theological debate. Understanding the mechanics of angelic imprisonment explains why certain rituals work, why some demons can be banished while others cannot, and most importantly, why the forces of darkness operate under rules they cannot break, no matter how desperately they try. I've spent months researching this topic, diving deep into ancient texts, forbidden grimoires, and scholarly works that most people will never see. What I discovered will shock you. The prison that holds the devil isn't what you've been taught to believe. And the reason he can't escape has nothing to do with his lack of power. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand the three fundamental principles that make angelic imprisonment absolutely unbreakable, the shocking truth about why the devil actually helped design his own prison, and the terrifying implications of what happens when these bonds finally weaken. But first, we need to go back to the very beginning, to the moment when rebellion first stirred in the celestial realm. The story begins not in the fiery depths of hell, but in the pristine courts of heaven itself. Picture, if you will, the most beautiful being ever created, standing at the right hand of the Almighty, Lucifer, the light bearer, the morning star, whose very presence could illuminate entire realms with radiant glory. This wasn't some crude demon with horns and pitchforks. This was perfection incarnate, an angel so magnificent that lesser celestial beings would weep just to glimpse his splendor. But beauty can corrupt, and perfection can breed pride. The ancient texts tell us that Lucifer gazed upon his own magnificence and made a fatal error in judgment. He believed that his glory was self-generated, that his power belonged to him alone. In that moment of cosmic narcissism, the first shadow fell across creation. What happened next wasn't a simple temper tantrum or a moment of angelic misbehavior. This was the first war, a conflict so devastating that it shook the very foundations of reality. Lucifer rallied a third of heaven's host to his banner, convincing them that they could overthrow the established order and claim dominion for themselves. These weren't weak-willed followers, mind you. These were powerful, intelligent beings who commanded forces beyond human comprehension. The war raged across dimensions, through realms of pure light and cosmic fire. Imagine battles fought with weapons forged from concentrated starlight, where a single sword stroke could shatter entire planets. Michael the Archangel led heaven's loyal forces, his blade carving arcs of divine justice through the rebel ranks. But this wasn't just a military conflict. This was a philosophical war about the very nature of authority, obedience, and free will. Here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. The rebels weren't defeated through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They were defeated by something far more subtle and infinitely more binding. The moment Lucifer raised his hand in rebellion, he invoked a cosmic principle that would ultimately become his eternal prison. He demanded the right to choose his own path, to exercise his will against the divine order. And here's the shocking truth that most people never realize. His request was granted. You see, the Almighty could have simply obliterated the rebels instantly. With a thought, every trace of their rebellion could have been erased from existence. But that would have violated something even more fundamental than divine authority. It would have violated the principle of free will itself. So, instead of destruction, the rebels received exactly what they asked for: complete separation from the source of all goodness, all light, all love. This is where our understanding of angelic imprisonment begins to take shape. The prison wasn't built around the devil. The prison was built from the devil's own choices, crystallized into eternal law by his act of ultimate rebellion. Every decision he made to turn away from the light became another bar in his cage. Every moment of pride, every whisper of hatred, every manipulation and lie added another layer to his bonds. But the truly diabolical genius of this imprisonment is that it operates on a principle the devil himself cannot reject without ceasing to be who he is. Remember, his entire identity is built on the concept of free will, on the right to choose his own path. To break the prison, he would have to surrender that very principle. He would have to admit that his rebellion was wrong, that his choices led him astray, that he needs redemption. And that, my friends, is the one thing the Prince of Pride can never do. Think about the psychological implications of this for a moment. The devil is trapped, not by external force, but by his own nature. He's like a man who has built a maze around himself and then forgotten the way out. Except in this case, he knows exactly where the exit is. It's marked with a sign that reads, humility, and he'd rather burn for eternity than walk through that door. This principle extends to every demon, every fallen angel, every dark spirit that followed Lucifer into rebellion. They are all bound by the same cosmic law. Their imprisonment is self-imposed, maintained by their refusal to acknowledge their error and seek forgiveness. The stronger their pride, the thicker their chains. The deeper their hatred, the smaller their cell becomes. But here's where things get really interesting. The angelic forces that maintain this prison system aren't guards in the traditional sense. They're more like cosmic administrators, ensuring that the natural consequences of rebellious choices are allowed to play out according to divine law. They don't actively torment the fallen angels. They simply maintain the conditions that the fallen angels have chosen for themselves. This is why exorcisms work, why certain rituals can banish demons, and why holy symbols have power over dark forces. These aren't arbitrary magical effects. They're expressions of the same fundamental law that created the prison in the first place. When a human being invokes divine authority with genuine faith and pure intent, they're essentially reminding the demon of the choice it made long ago and the consequences that followed. The demon doesn't flee because it's physically overpowered. It flees because it's confronted with the reality of its own imprisonment, forced to acknowledge the bars of its self-made cage. The crucifix doesn't burn demonic flesh through some mysterious energy. It burns because it represents everything the demon rejected when it chose rebellion over obedience. Now you might be wondering, if this prison is so perfect, so absolutely unbreakable, why do we still see demonic activity in our world? Why haven't all the fallen angels simply faded away into their own private hells? The answer to that question reveals the second fundamental principle of angelic imprisonment, and it's far more terrifying than anything we've discussed so far. The prison doesn't prevent the fallen angels from acting in our world. It prevents them from finding satisfaction in their actions. Every demonic temptation, every act of possession, every whisper of evil that influences human hearts is like a starving man gorging himself on sand. The demons can consume all they want, but they can never be satisfied. They can corrupt human souls, spread suffering and despair, wage their petty wars against creation, but none of it brings them the fulfillment they desperately crave. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of their punishment. They retain enough of their original power to cause tremendous damage, but they've lost the ability to derive any real joy or satisfaction from their actions. They're like cosmic drug addicts, constantly seeking a high that their very nature makes impossible to achieve. This explains why demonic activity often seems so frenzied, so desperate, so ultimately self-defeating. The demons aren't just trying to corrupt humanity out of spite. They're trying to fill a void within themselves that can never be filled through destructive means. Every evil act is simultaneously an expression of their power and a reminder of their impotence. But there's something even more disturbing hidden in the ancient texts, something that suggests the devil's imprisonment might not be as permanent as we've been led to believe. Scattered throughout various religious traditions are hints, prophecies, and warnings about a time when these bonds will begin to weaken, not because the devil grows stronger, but because humanity grows weaker in its understanding of the principles that maintain the prison. You see, the angelic imprisonment system relies on more than just cosmic law. It relies on human recognition of that law, on our collective acknowledgement of the moral order that separates good from evil. When humans begin to blur those lines, when we start to see evil as just another lifestyle choice, or rebellion as merely self-expression, we inadvertently weaken the very foundations that keep the darkness locked away. This isn't some abstract spiritual concept. This has real, measurable effects on the supernatural world. As moral relativism spreads, as traditional concepts of sin and redemption are abandoned, the prison walls become more porous. The demons don't gain new powers, but the barriers that once contained their influence begin to crack and crumble. And here's the truly chilling part. The devil doesn't need to break out of his prison to achieve his ultimate victory. He just needs to convince enough humans to unlock the doors from the outside. This brings us to the third and final principle of angelic imprisonment, the one that explains why certain humans seem to have such power over demonic forces, while others fall victim to them almost instantly. It's not about religious affiliation, or ritual knowledge, or even moral purity in the traditional sense. It's about understanding the nature of choice itself. Human beings, unlike angels, exist in a state of constant becoming. Every moment of our lives, We're making choices that either align us with the creative forces of the universe or push us toward the destructive chaos that the fallen angels represent. But here's the key difference. Our choices aren't final. We can always change direction, always choose differently, always seek redemption, no matter how far we've fallen. This terrifies the demons more than any holy water or sacred ritual ever could, because in our capacity for change, they see a reflection of what they've lost forever. They see the possibility of redemption that they rejected so long ago that they can barely remember what it felt like to choose the light. But this also gives properly prepared humans incredible power over demonic forces. When a person truly understands their own capacity for choice, when they grasp the fundamental difference between temporary mistakes and eternal rebellion, they become like a mirror held up to the demons' faces. The demons see their own imprisonment reflected back at them, and the sight is unbearable. This is why some exorcists succeed where others fail. It's not about the words they speak or the rituals they perform. It's about their absolute certainty in their own freedom to choose good over evil, light over darkness, creation over destruction. That certainty creates a kind of spiritual electromagnetic field that the demons simply cannot penetrate. But as we'll discover in the next part of our investigation, this power comes with a terrible price, because the closer a human being comes to understanding the true nature of angelic imprisonment, the more attention they attract from forces that have been locked away since the dawn of time, forces that are growing restless as the end times approach, testing the strength of their ancient bonds and looking for any weakness they can exploit. The question isn't whether the devil can break his angelic imprisonment. The question is whether humanity will be foolish enough to help him do it. And based on what I've uncovered in my research, that moment may be closer than any of us realize. But that's a story for our next chapter, when we'll explore the shocking prophecies hidden in ancient texts, the modern events that seem to be fulfilling those prophecies, and the terrifying signs that suggest the great prison is already beginning to crack. What most people don't understand about angelic imprisonment is that it operates on 3 distinct layers, each more terrifying than the last. We've explored the first layer, the prison of choice, but now we must venture deeper into realms where even seasoned theologians fear to tread. The second layer is what ancient scholars called the mirror of torment, and it's here that we discover why the devil's suffering is so exquisitely calibrated. You see, fallen angels don't experience punishment the way humans do. They don't feel physical pain or emotional anguish in any way we could comprehend. Instead, they're forced to witness an eternal reflection of what they could have been. Imagine being shown every moment of your existence a perfect version of yourself that made different choices. Picture seeing not just what you lost, but what you actively destroyed through your rebellion. The mirror of torment doesn't show the devil what heaven looks like now. It shows him what heaven could have looked like with him in it, had he remained loyal. This psychological torture is far more devastating than any physical punishment could ever be. The devil doesn't just know he made the wrong choice. He experiences in vivid detail every possible good outcome his rebellion prevented, every act of love he could have inspired, every moment of beauty he could have created, every soul he could have guided toward the light instead of away from it. But here's where the prison's design reveals its most diabolical aspect. The mirror doesn't just show him these possibilities once. It shows them continuously, but with one crucial twist. Each reflection is slightly different, showing him that even now, even after all this time, redemption remains theoretically possible. All he would have to do is humble himself, admit his error, and seek forgiveness. The knowledge that escape is always within reach, yet forever beyond his nature to grasp, creates a form of suffering that transcends anything physical reality could devise. It's like being eternally thirsty while standing in a river, but being unable to drink, because doing so would require you to become someone you're fundamentally not. This explains why demonic activity often seems so desperate and frenzied. The fallen angels aren't just acting out of malice. They're trying to create enough chaos in the world to distract themselves from the constant vision of what they're missing. Every act of corruption is simultaneously a rebellion against their imprisonment and a futile attempt to escape the psychological torment of the mirror. But the third layer of angelic imprisonment is perhaps the most ingenious of all, and it's here that we discover why certain humans throughout history have wielded such incredible power over supernatural forces. This layer is called the paradox of participation, and understanding it requires us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the nature of evil itself. The devil and his fallen angels aren't separate from creation. They're still part of it, bound to it by cosmic laws they cannot break. Every act of rebellion, every whisper of temptation, every moment of corruption serves a purpose they never intended. Their very existence as a source of opposition makes the choice between good and evil meaningful for humanity. Think about it this way. Without the possibility of choosing wrongly, choosing rightly becomes meaningless. Without the existence of darkness, light has no definition. The fallen angels, in their eternal rebellion, have become unwilling servants of a cosmic balance they sought to overthrow. This is why the devil is sometimes called the accuser or the prosecutor in ancient texts. He doesn't hold this role by choice, but by necessity. His very nature compels him to test human souls, to present them with temptations and challenges that reveal their true character. He's like a cosmic quality control inspector, sorting the wheat from the chaff through methods he despises but cannot abandon. The paradox of participation means that every time a demon influences a human being, it's actually participating in a divine plan it opposes with every fiber of its being. The demon believes it's corrupting a soul for its own purposes, but it's actually creating an opportunity for that soul to choose good over evil, to grow stronger through resistance, to prove its worth through trial. This is perhaps the most exquisite torture imaginable for beings whose entire identity is built on opposition to divine will. They are forced to serve the very purposes they rebelled against, unable to act in any way that doesn't ultimately further the cosmic plan they hate. But here's where things become truly unsettling for those of us living in the modern world. The effectiveness of this three-layer prison system depends on humanity maintaining a clear understanding of moral absolutes. When humans begin to question whether good and evil really exist, when we start treating moral choices as matters of personal preference rather than cosmic significance, we don't just weaken our own spiritual defenses. We begin to destabilize the very foundations that keep the darkness contained. Recent decades have seen an unprecedented erosion of these foundations. We live in an age where traditional concepts of sin and redemption are dismissed as outdated superstitions, where moral relativism is taught as enlightened thinking, where the very idea that some choices might be objectively wrong is considered intolerant or judgmental. What most people don't realize is that this philosophical shift has real, measurable effects on the supernatural world. Ancient binding spells that once held demonic forces at bay are losing their power. Protective wards that guarded sacred spaces for centuries are beginning to fail. Exorcists around the world report that their traditional methods are becoming less effective with each passing year. This isn't because the demons are growing stronger. It's because the collective human understanding that gives those methods their power is growing weaker. The angelic prison system relies on humanity's recognition of the moral order. When we stop believing in that order, the prison walls become transparent. But there's something even more disturbing happening. Something that suggests we may be witnessing the early stages of a cosmic catastrophe that religious texts have warned about for millennia. Scattered throughout various traditions are prophecies describing a time when the barriers between realms will thin, when ancient evils will stir in their bonds, when the great prison will begin to show cracks in its foundation. These aren't vague metaphorical warnings. They're specific descriptions of signs and portents that would herald the weakening of angelic imprisonment. And if you know what to look for, those signs are everywhere. The first sign is the proliferation of what ancient texts call doorways of confusion. These are locations where the natural order has been so disrupted by human activity that supernatural entities can more easily manifest. Modern urban environments, with their electromagnetic pollution, their concentration of human suffering and despair, their disconnection from natural rhythms, create perfect conditions for these doorways to form. Major cities around the world are reporting unprecedented levels of unexplained phenomena, not just ghost sightings or poltergeist activity, but encounters with entities that don't fit any traditional categories. Beings that seem to exist partially in our reality and partially somewhere else, as if they're testing the boundaries between dimensions. The second sign is the emergence of humans who seem to possess supernatural abilities without any training or spiritual preparation. These individuals, often dismissed as psychics or mediums, are actually serving as unwitting conduits for forces that are probing the weaknesses in the prison system. They're not channeling spirits or reading minds. They're allowing imprisoned entities to experience glimpses of our world through their consciousness. But the most alarming sign is the increasing frequency of what researchers call mass spiritual events. Entire communities suddenly experiencing shared visions, collective nightmares, or simultaneous encounters with unexplained phenomena. These events aren't random. They follow specific patterns that match descriptions found in prophetic texts, describing the preliminary stages of cosmic upheaval. Each of these incidents represents a test, a probe, an experiment conducted by intelligences that have been locked away since the dawn of time. They're not trying to escape their prison all at once. They're mapping its weaknesses, identifying the points where human doubt and confusion have created vulnerabilities in the cosmic order. And here's the most chilling part of all. According to the ancient texts, the fallen angels don't need to break out of their prison to achieve their ultimate goal. They just need to create enough chaos and confusion in our world to make their prison irrelevant. If they can turn Earth itself into a reflection of their own rebellious nature, they'll have effectively expanded their domain to include our entire reality. This is why understanding the true nature of angelic imprisonment matters so much. It's not just academic curiosity or religious speculation. It's a matter of cosmic survival. Every time we choose moral relativism over absolute truth, every time we embrace confusion over clarity, every time we treat spiritual matters as entertainment rather than life and death realities, we're contributing to the weakening of barriers that have protected humanity for thousands of years. But knowledge is power, and understanding the enemy's limitations is the first step toward victory. The fallen angels may be testing their bonds, but those bonds still hold. The prison may be showing cracks, but it hasn't crumbled. And most importantly, the power to strengthen those barriers lies not with ancient warriors or celestial beings, but with ordinary humans who understand the true nature of choice. Every person who chooses good over evil, light over darkness, truth over deception, becomes a living reinforcement of the cosmic order. Every act of genuine love, every moment of authentic sacrifice, every choice made with moral clarity adds another layer of protection to the great prison that keeps the darkness at bay. The question isn't whether humanity has the power to maintain the angelic imprisonment system. The question is whether we have the wisdom and courage to use that power before it's too late. Because according to the most disturbing prophecies I've uncovered, we may be running out of time faster than anyone realizes. The timeline for cosmic catastrophe isn't measured in human years or decades. It's measured in what the ancient texts call moments of collective choosing, pivotal points in history when humanity's moral direction shifts dramatically enough to impact the supernatural realm itself. And according to my research, we may have already passed several of these critical thresholds without even realizing it. Consider this disturbing pattern. Every major historical period that saw widespread moral collapse was preceded by the same sequence of events we're witnessing today. First, traditional sources of spiritual authority lose their credibility. Then, individual conscience becomes the sole arbiter of right and wrong. Finally, the very concepts of good and evil are dismissed as primitive superstitions that enlightened people have evolved beyond. Rome followed this exact trajectory in its final centuries. So did the civilizations of Babylon, Egypt, and Atlantis, if the forbidden texts are to be believed. Each time, the weakening of moral foundations created opportunities for supernatural forces to influence human affairs more directly. Each time, the results were catastrophic. But here's what makes our current situation uniquely dangerous. Previous civilizations that experienced moral collapse were relatively isolated. Their spiritual failures affected primarily their own populations. Today, for the first time in human history, we have a truly global civilization. When moral foundations erode now, the effects ripple across the entire planet simultaneously. The fallen angels have never had an opportunity like this before. Instead of working to corrupt one nation or one culture at a time, they can now influence the entire human species through interconnected systems of communication, commerce, and culture. A single idea, a single philosophical shift can spread across the globe in hours rather than centuries. This acceleration explains why supernatural activity has intensified so dramatically in recent decades. The demons aren't getting stronger, but they're getting more efficient. Every movie that portrays evil as sympathetic, Every book that questions the existence of absolute truth, every cultural shift that normalizes what previous generations considered aberrant behavior, creates new cracks in the prison walls. But the most insidious aspect of this process is how it disguises itself as progress. The erosion of moral absolutes is packaged as intellectual sophistication. The abandonment of traditional spiritual practices is presented as liberation from outdated superstitions. The rejection of divine authority is celebrated as the triumph of human reason. What most people don't realize is that this isn't human reasoning at all. It's the influence of intelligences that have spent millennia studying human psychology, learning exactly which arguments and ideas will appeal to our pride, our desire for autonomy, our fear of being judged or controlled by others. The fallen angels can't force humans to abandon their moral foundations. That would violate the same cosmic laws that created their prison in the first place. But they can whisper suggestions, plant doubts, offer seemingly logical arguments that lead us to abandon those foundations voluntarily. And once we've made that choice ourselves, the consequences become binding under the same system of cosmic justice that originally imprisoned the rebels. This is why certain locations around the world have become focal points for unexplained phenomena, places where human moral confusion has reached critical mass, where the collective rejection of absolute truth has created what researchers call reality soft spots. These aren't just haunted locations or centers of paranormal activity. They're testing grounds where imprisoned entities can experiment with the limits of their confinement. I've personally investigated several of these sites, and what I've discovered is deeply unsettling. The supernatural activity isn't random or chaotic. It follows specific patterns that suggest coordinated intelligence behind it. These entities are conducting systematic experiments, learning how much influence they can exert in our world without technically violating the terms of their imprisonment. They've discovered that they can manifest more powerfully in locations where humans have voluntarily rejected moral clarity. They can influence events more directly in communities that have embraced relativistic thinking. They can even possess or control individuals who have completely abandoned the concept of objective good and evil. But here's the crucial point that gives us hope. These experiments are still constrained by the fundamental laws that created the prison system. The fallen angels can only operate within the boundaries that human choices create for them. They can influence us, but they can't control us. They can tempt us, but they can't force us to sin. They can offer us lies, but they can't prevent us from recognizing truth. This brings us to perhaps the most important revelation in all my research. The power to maintain or destroy the angelic imprisonment system doesn't rest with supernatural forces. It rests with ordinary human beings, making ordinary moral choices every day of their lives. Every time someone chooses honesty over deception, they reinforce the cosmic distinction between truth and falsehood. Every time someone chooses sacrifice over selfishness, they strengthen the barriers that separate good from evil. Every time someone chooses humility over pride, they remind the imprisoned rebels of the choice they refused to make so long ago. But this also means that every moral compromise, every ethical shortcut, every decision to treat right and wrong as matters of convenience rather than principle contributes to the weakening of those same barriers. We're not passive observers in this cosmic drama. We're active participants whose choices determine the outcome. The ancient texts describe certain humans as guardians of the threshold, individuals whose understanding of moral absolutes is so clear and unwavering that they serve as living reinforcements to the prison system. These aren't necessarily religious figures or spiritual leaders. They're ordinary people who have grasped the fundamental truth that some choices are objectively right and others are objectively wrong. Regardless of circumstances or consequences, when such individuals encounter demonic influence, something remarkable happens. The demons don't just flee from their presence. They're forced to acknowledge their own imprisonment more vividly than ever. It's as if these humans serve as mirrors, reflecting back to the fallen angels the true nature of their condition and the choices that led them there. But becoming such a guardian requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires what the texts call moral crystallization, a process where theoretical knowledge about good and evil becomes lived reality. This happens when someone faces a genuine moral crisis and chooses to do what's right, despite the personal cost. The process is painful, sometimes devastatingly so. It often involves losing things we value, relationships we cherish, opportunities we desire, all for the sake of maintaining our integrity. But those who complete this crystallization process discover that they've gained something far more valuable than what they've lost. They've gained the power to stand against darkness itself. This explains why certain individuals throughout history have wielded such incredible spiritual authority. It wasn't because they were born special or chosen by divine decree. It was because they chose to pay the price for moral clarity, to sacrifice their comfort and convenience for the sake of truth. And here's what makes this especially relevant today. The current crisis in angelic imprisonment has created unprecedented opportunities for moral crystallization. The very forces that threaten to weaken the prison system also create situations where individuals can choose to strengthen it through acts of moral courage. Every person who stands up for truth when it's unpopular, who maintains their principles when it's costly, who chooses love over hatred, even when hatred seems justified, becomes a potential guardian of the threshold. These individuals don't just resist the corruption spreading through our world, they actively counteract it, creating zones of moral clarity that serve as anchors for the cosmic order. But time is running short. The ancient prophecies speak of a final period, a cosmic moment when the accumulated weight of human moral choices will determine whether the great prison holds or fails completely. We may be living in that period right now. The signs are unmistakable. To those who know how to read them, the boundary between our world and the realm of the imprisoned is becoming increasingly permeable. Entities that have been locked away since the dawn of time are beginning to stir. The very fabric of reality shows stress fractures where conflicting forces pull it in different directions. Yet even now, even at this late hour, the outcome isn't predetermined. The prison system was designed to be self-reinforcing, powered by human recognition of moral truth. As long as enough people maintain that recognition, as long as enough individuals are willing to pay the price for moral clarity, the barriers can be rebuilt stronger than ever. But if we continue down the current path, if we allow the erosion of moral foundations to accelerate, if we choose comfort and convenience over truth and justice, then we may witness the fulfillment of the most terrifying prophecies ever written. The great prison may not just crack or weaken, it may shatter completely, releasing forces upon our world that have been contained since the very beginning of creation. The choice, as always, is ours to make. But we must understand that this choice has consequences far beyond our individual lives or even our civilization. We're choosing not just our own destiny, but the destiny of reality itself. The question isn't whether we can maintain the angelic imprisonment system. The question is whether we will. The answer to that question may depend on what happens in the next few critical years, as humanity stands at a crossroads, unlike any in recorded history. Because there's one final aspect of angelic imprisonment that we haven't discussed yet. One that makes our current situation even more precarious than most people realize. The fallen angels aren't just testing the boundaries of their confinement anymore. They're actively recruiting human allies to help them from the outside. And I'm not talking about obvious devil worshippers or practitioners of dark magic. I'm talking about ordinary people who have been subtly influenced to adopt philosophies and behaviors that systematically weaken the cosmic order without ever realizing what they're doing. This recruitment process is so sophisticated, so carefully disguised, that most of its targets never suspect they're being manipulated at all. The demons have learned that direct temptation often fails because it triggers human moral instincts. But indirect influence that appeals to our highest aspirations while leading us toward destructive outcomes, is devastatingly effective. Consider how this works in practice. A person is encouraged to embrace tolerance and open-mindedness. Noble goals, certainly. But gradually, that tolerance is expanded to include tolerance for evil itself. Open-mindedness becomes unwillingness to make any moral judgments at all. What begins as compassion ends as complicity with darkness. And the person never realizes how far they've traveled from their original intentions. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of the current assault on the prison system. The fallen angels have discovered that humans will voluntarily tear down moral barriers if they're convinced they're doing so for virtuous reasons. We'll abandon absolute truth if we think we're promoting harmony. We'll reject divine authority if we believe we're defending human dignity. But here's what makes this strategy truly terrifying. Unlike previous attempts at corruption, which targeted individuals or small groups, this current campaign operates on a civilizational scale. Entire educational systems, media networks, cultural institutions, and political movements have been influenced to promote ideas that sound enlightened, but systematically undermine the foundations of cosmic order. The result is a generation of humans who genuinely believe they're more moral and enlightened than their ancestors, while simultaneously dismantling every barrier that has protected humanity from supernatural predation for thousands of years. They reject the concept of evil while making themselves increasingly vulnerable to it. They dismiss warnings about spiritual warfare while engaging in behaviors that invite that warfare into their lives. And the most chilling part is that this isn't happening by accident. Ancient texts describe this exact scenario as one of the final signs before the complete collapse of angelic imprisonment. They speak of a time when humans would call good evil and evil good, when they would be ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of truth, when they would have a form of godliness but deny its power. That time appears to be now. But even as these dark prophecies seem to be fulfilling themselves around us, there's something else happening that gives reason for hope. The same cosmic pressures that create opportunities for moral collapse also create opportunities for unprecedented spiritual awakening. The crisis itself is forcing humans to confront fundamental questions about the nature of reality, truth, and moral obligation that many of us might otherwise avoid our entire lives. I've witnessed this phenomenon firsthand in my research. People who might have lived their entire lives in comfortable moral ambiguity are suddenly forced to take clear stands on issues that matter. The very intensity of the current spiritual warfare is creating what researchers call crystallization events, moments where individuals must choose between truth and deception, good and evil, with absolute clarity. Those who choose correctly don't just resist the corruption around them. They become beacons of moral clarity that strengthen the entire cosmic order. Each person who achieves this kind of spiritual awakening doesn't just save themselves. They create a zone of protection that extends to everyone around them. This explains why certain communities, certain families, certain individuals seem to be immune to the chaos and confusion that's overwhelming our broader civilization. It's not luck or privilege or special protection. It's the result of moral choices that align them with the fundamental structure of reality itself. But here's what's truly remarkable about our current situation. The ancient texts suggest that we're living through what they call the Great Sorting, a cosmic process where every human soul reveals its true nature through the choices it makes under extreme pressure. This isn't judgment imposed from outside. It's self-selection based on what we actually value when everything else is stripped away. Those who choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, love over hatred, sacrifice over selfishness, are being prepared for something extraordinary. The texts hint at a role for such individuals that goes beyond merely maintaining the current prison system. They speak of a time when these crystallized humans will participate in a complete renovation of the cosmic order itself. But those who choose the opposite path, who embrace relativism, who reject absolute truth, who prioritize their own desires over moral law, are creating a very different destiny for themselves. They're not just risking spiritual damnation in some future judgment. They're actively aligning themselves with forces that seek the destruction of everything good and beautiful in creation. This brings us to perhaps the most important practical question of our entire investigation. How can ordinary people navigate this crisis successfully? How can we avoid being deceived by sophisticated spiritual warfare, while contributing to the strengthening rather than the weakening of cosmic order? The answer isn't as complicated as you might think, though it's far from easy. It begins with a simple recognition that moral choices matter, not just for our personal happiness or social harmony, but for the fundamental structure of reality itself. Every decision we make either reinforces the barriers between good and evil or contributes to their erosion. This means we can no longer afford to treat ethical questions as matters of personal preference or cultural conditioning. We must recognize that some things are objectively right and others are objectively wrong, regardless of what anyone thinks or feels about them. This isn't narrow-mindedness or intolerance. It's alignment with the cosmic principles that keep chaos from overwhelming creation. But recognition is only the first step. The real work begins when we start making choices based on these principles, even when those choices cost us something we value. This is where most people fail, not because they don't understand what's right, but because they're not willing to pay the price for doing it. The price can be steep. It might mean losing relationships with people who can't accept our moral clarity. It might mean sacrificing career opportunities that would require us to compromise our principles. It might mean standing alone when everyone around us is embracing popular delusions. But here's what the ancient texts promise to those who pay this price. They don't just maintain their spiritual integrity. They discover that they possess power they never knew they had. Power to resist deception. Power to see through illusions. Power to stand against forces that overwhelm others. Power to serve as anchors of truth in a world increasingly unmoored from reality. This power isn't mystical or supernatural in any obvious sense. It's the natural result of aligning ourselves with the fundamental structure of the universe. When we choose to live according to cosmic law rather than personal preference, we gain access to the strength and stability that law provides, and that power is desperately needed right now, because the forces testing the boundaries of angelic imprisonment aren't going to stop their assault voluntarily. They can't stop. Their very nature compels them to continue pushing against their bonds, looking for any weakness they can exploit, any crack they can widen, any opportunity they can seize. The only thing that can stop them is humans who understand what's at stake and who are willing to do something about it. Not through elaborate rituals or esoteric practices, but through the simple, daily choice to do what's right, regardless of the consequences. Every person who makes that choice becomes part of the solution. Every individual who refuses to compromise their moral integrity for the sake of comfort or acceptance contributes to the strengthening of the cosmic order. Every human being who chooses truth over deception helps maintain the barriers that protect all of us from forces we can barely comprehend. This is why the devil couldn't break angelic imprisonment through force or cunning alone. The prison wasn't built to contain him from the outside. It was built from his own choices, maintained by cosmic law and reinforced by human recognition of moral truth. As long as enough humans maintain that recognition, as long as enough people are willing to pay the price for moral clarity, the prison holds. But if we abandon that recognition, if we choose comfort over truth, if we allow ourselves to be deceived into thinking that good and evil are just matters of opinion, then we become unwitting accomplices in our own destruction. We help the devil do what he could never do alone: tear down the barriers that have protected humanity since the dawn of creation. The choice is ours, and the time to make it is now. Not tomorrow, not when things get worse, not when someone else takes the lead. Right now, in this moment, with whatever challenges and opportunities we're facing today, because every moment we delay, every day we postpone making the hard choices, every time we choose convenience over conscience, we contribute to a process that could ultimately lead to consequences beyond anything our world has ever experienced. The ancient texts are clear about what happens if the great prison fails completely. It wouldn't just mean the return of the devil and his fallen angels to active participation in our world. It would mean the collapse of the moral order that makes civilization possible, the breakdown of the natural laws that make life sustainable, the dissolution of the barriers between chaos and creation itself. But those same texts also describe what happens if enough humans choose the path of moral crystallization, if enough people are willing to pay the price for absolute truth. They speak of a renewal so complete, a victory so decisive, that the threat of cosmic rebellion would be eliminated forever, not through the destruction of the rebels, but through their ultimate transformation back into the beings of light they were originally created to be. That's the real reason why the devil couldn't break angelic imprisonment and why he still can't today. The prison wasn't designed as a permanent punishment, but as a temporary containment system that would hold until enough humans evolved spiritually to participate in the cosmic restoration process. The fallen angels are trapped not by divine cruelty, but by divine mercy, held in a state of suspended animation until creation itself becomes strong enough to redeem them. We may be approaching that moment now. The very intensity of the current spiritual crisis suggests that we're nearing some kind of resolution, some final outcome that will determine the fate of both the imprisoned and their jailers. The question is whether that resolution will be victory or catastrophe, redemption or destruction, the strengthening of cosmic order or its complete collapse. The answer depends on choices that ordinary people like you and me are making right now, today, in the apparently small moral decisions that actually determine the fate of the universe itself. Choose wisely. The cosmos is watching, and eternity hangs in the balance.